Hello, my name is Michael Lightfoot. I'll be the presenter today for Corporate Law 101, an entrepreneur's guide. Last year, while I was researching some cases, I was looking at cases from several states, and it all of a sudden became clear to me that there's literally an explosion of new lawsuits against businesses and LLCs nationwide. This concerned me particularly for my client base. I found out that most of these were filed by creditors or the IRS or disgruntled exes, spouses in one form or another, ex-investors, people who thought that various decisions by the company were wrong and were wrongful, and therefore potentially they wanted to try to break through the company's assets to get to the owner's personal assets. That was troubling. So what I decided to do was to put together about a 2-hour presentation to all of my clients to ensure that I had all of them covered, to make sure that they had their business in order. And then I included that originally as part of my $400 an hour presentation fee and retainer for my clients. But I began to see a lot of companies having the same problem, so I decided that it was best to make this available to everyone, this material available. So I hope you enjoy what we're about to see. So who can benefit from this training? If you're thinking about opening your own company, if you've already formed a corporation using somebody like LegalZoom or somebody to that effect, and you're wondering, what's next? Maybe you're a sole owner and you have been going along and don't really know what the corporate formalities are, or you have partners, shareholders, members of an LLC, or you're just interested in understanding more about the corporate structures and the way that companies should operate. That's what we're going to do in this course, and so this course is for you. Now, before we get down to the meat of the matter, I want to know, why did you guys choose a corporation? I mean, what were you thinking when you started the business? Did you really think about, I want to limit my liability? That's probably what most people think about. Do I think that I needed to have some corporate structure to allow me to be protected from the other investors, from the IRS, from the various things, or my business lawyer told me that I needed to do it, or my accountant told me I needed to do it, or your, great Aunt Tilly told you to do it. Somewhere along the line, you thought you were doing something along the way that was trying to protect the limited liability, I'm presuming. As we go forward here, I really want to talk a little bit about, now we're going to break this thing up into 3 sessions, as I told you. I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to learn here. The first session will be on the legal structures, how to set up an articles of incorporation and get that along the way, or an articles of organization for an LLC. And we're going to talk about shareholder agreements amongst the founders. The second group is going to be around shareholders, shares, the share ledger. Where do you keep all of the information about the shares? And then various tools that are used along with shares, such as how do I offer warrants to people? How do I give options to my employees? Is there such a thing as an earn-out? Could I make people kind of earn these shares, and if so, how? And then lastly, we're going to talk about the board of directors, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on the corporate formalities that are required for corporations and LLCs. Okay, let's talk about legal structuring of a corporation. There's a lot of different types of corporations, and again, I'm going to start here. I'm not trying to teach you to be corporate lawyers. I'm trying to teach you the basics of corporate structure. I'm trying to have you understand what the concepts that most lawyers are going to talk to you about, so that you can respond in various ways that will make you a better educated consumer for the legal services of lawyers and the services of other products. Basically, you can be a sole proprietor, and that means that you do not have a corporate shell. You have basically your entire personal assets are at risk. You're running a business as a kind of a hobby. I could tell you a story, and probably one of the more painful stories from my career is a young nurse who I knew, a client of mine, came to me. She had been laid off. She decided to do some things on the side, and she decided to make little knickknacks for the church. and the church was out of Louisiana, so she would make her little things and send them off down there, and they would sell them, and she would be able to give those things as donations to the church, or she would be able to make a little money on the side. So she was really happy. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, she got a lawsuit for $100,000, being sued by another church in Louisiana that she had stolen their intellectual property and that she had violated the contract she had signed with them. And it was before the federal district court in the French court in Louisiana. All other courts in the United States are English, except Louisiana, which has French law. So it's very hard to find a practitioner down there. We were very lucky. One of my classmates was a trial lawyer in Louisiana. I was a trial lawyer up here. We co-hosted the trial, basically, and were able to get not only the charges dropped against my client, but in fact determined that it was a fraud, and several other people were saved several thousands of dollars. The important point here is that had my client had a corporation, rather than have entered into the contract solely in her own personal name, we could have collapsed the corporation without damage to her at all once the lawsuit was filed. But since she had done it personally, we had no choice but to have to defend her personally, which cost her substantial dollars to protect the personal assets, including her home and other things that she had that were valuable. The next kind of a corporation is a C Corp. And you might have heard a C Corp or an S Corp and not know the difference. All companies, when they're formed, start out as C Corps. Okay, unless they're one of the other types. In other words, they're a professional corporation or things of that sort. But they start as a C Corp. And a C Corp and an S Corp are not types of corporations. They're tax designations for those types of companies. Okay, so when you set up a company, you generally start out as a C, and then within 70 days or so, you need to talk to your CPA. I'm not a CPA. I'm not giving tax advice. But within a limited number of days, you have to elect to become an S Corp, and you need to talk to your CPA or a financial advisor about that. You may have also heard about LLCs, or limited liability companies. They are corporations. They were set up, but you can think of them more as partnerships. And they have a lot of the same rules and regulations. And you can, the advantages are you can disproportionately allocate revenues in an LLC much easier than you can in a corporation. The difference between a C corporation and an S corporation is the tax election. At the end of the year, the income or loss from the S corporation is allocated to the individual owners of the corporation, generally on a schedule to their tax return. Okay? The difference between sole proprietor versus a C corp versus S corp versus an LLC. And this is a nice little overview chart. The C Corp, the formatting requirements, I'm not going to read to you. You can read for yourselves. But the personal liability in a sole proprietorship, as I said, is virtually unlimited liability to the owner. The shareholders are typically not held liable on a C Corp, and we're going to talk about there are very good exceptions to that, especially if you don't keep up with the corporate formalities. The same thing is true with the S Corporation. And then in an LLC, the members are not typically held liable, again, unless their actions allow for them to become personally liable. And that's what we're talking about as a part of the issue that we're trying to bring forward to you as entrepreneurs. The administrative requirements, you have almost no requirements in the proprietorship, self-proprietorship. You can do almost nothing. Sometimes they'll set up bank accounts, but they have no separation between themselves and their personal assets, so literally everything's hanging out. The C Corporation generally has a board of directors, officers, annual meetings, things of that sort along the way that allow them to basically have an interesting concept for how they operate the company, period. The S Corporation, the election of the board of directors or officers and annual meeting requirements are pretty much the same as the C Corporation. The LLC, you have much fewer limited liability company requirements, but they're laid out in what is called an operating agreement. And the operating agreement is very important to the functioning of the company. Management is you can have a member managed, or you can have a manager managed. We'll talk more about that when we get to the LLC types of setup. Almost all of these are perpetual companies, terminated when the proprietor either dies or goes out of business in the sole proprietorship. The remainder corporations have almost unlimited life of their own. They are literally, to the courts, persons. Okay, taxation is some of the biggest reasons that you go to some of these. For a sole proprietorship, the entity is not taxable. It's only to the proprietor's payment of taxes on whatever they make. The taxes at a corporate rate on a C corporation are sometimes considered double taxation, in that the company will pay taxes on it, and then the distributions to the shareholders are taxable as well. On an S corporation, there are no taxes on the corporate entity. It passes through to the shareholders, as I discussed earlier. And in an LLC, there's no tax at the entity level. Income passes to the members as part of their process. We talked about the double taxation already. Self-employment taxes, I'm not going to read to you. Capital raising. Individual provides the capital in a sole proprietorship. Generally, there's not. If you're doing partners and you're doing it as individual sole proprietorships, it's very dangerous, because you can become liable for all of the actions of your partner, and that's what the other party would be considered. So if they go off and commit to a lease, you very well could personally be held liable for that. That's a major problem. In a corporation, so long as the corporate formalities are followed, in the sense that you elect officers, directors, things of that sort, the actions to make anyone liable would have to go through the corporation. Basically, in an S corp, it's harder to raise money because the shares of stock are sold to raise capital, but the limitations of the S corp do not incentivize corporate investors and or venture capital types of folks to want to invest in the company. So you can make a one-time determination to go from an S to a C, or vice versa, but that needs to be discussed with your financial advisor. And in an LLC, you can sell your interests, but they're subject to the operating agreement and determination of how those laws and rules of the operating agreement apply. And of course, the SEC rules also apply to all of these across the board. Ease of operation, it's easiest to run your own sole proprietorship. You don't really have any rules, and you don't file anything. You're pretty much out there. In a C corp and an S corp, you have to file annually. You have to have board of directors minutes, board of directors quarterly, and then annual shareholder meetings. We're going to get into a lot more detail here along the way, and it's easier in some states on an LLC than it is in a corporation. And we're going to talk about what an LLC should really be keeping along the way. Now, let's look at a checklist of incorporation basics. We're going to go through one for the incorporation, which is a corporation, some of the basic things that we will discuss as part of this training. And we'll also have one for limited liability companies next. So let's kind of go through these. The first step that we do is we check for name availability in the state in which you want to file. You basically file in one state, and then you apply the application to that state. And if you wish to operate in other states, then you basically are required to register as a foreign corporation in those jurisdictions. The next thing we do is prepare articles of incorporation, and we're going to go into that next. Then you mail the articles of incorporation to the state corporation division along the way. You generally get a receipt copy return a certified copy of the articles. In some states, it's actually filed online, and you can get and order certified copies if you need them. You order a book and a seal for the corporation, and we'll talk in more detail about what that is and some of the online options that are appearing now. You need to prepare bylaws, and we'll get into the detail there, and notice of waiver of meeting, because you're going to have the first meetings of your company. And if you haven't done that in the beginning, we really need to talk to you about how you go about doing that. It's very important that you get your officers elected and that you ratify the actions of the people who have been operating the company if you don't have your house in order today. Very important function. And I would advise you to call your attorneys if you haven't had that process along the way. Of course, you have to comply with all the state laws concerning fictitious names. You can't use certain words along the way. You can't use certain trademarked words such as Coca-Cola or McDonald's in your name unless, of course, that's who you are. And again, we talked about you want to talk to the accountant about electing for the IRS S corporation. Again, guys, I just want to emphasize I'm not giving you tax advice, but filing of the S corp is time sensitive, so don't delay in this activity. Generally, it can be applied for pretty easily through your accountant. And then you have to apply for and obtain an FEIN number. And again, your attorneys can help you with that. You go to the IRS website. You have to give them a piece of information after you've received your formal approval for the corporation. And then you pick your tax year, things of that sort, and off you go. If you're going to sell within the state, you want to apply a state tax number. And then we're going to talk in much more detail about a stockholders agreement, sometimes called shareholders agreements, which really lays out the rules between the shareholders themselves. Very important document. And then, of course, we're going to talk about issuing shares to shareholders. We're going to prepare waivers of notice because in order to have the meetings, you don't want to have 7 or 10 days notice that is required in the bylaws. So you want to make sure that everybody that's attending the meeting or that's eligible to attend the meeting waives their notice. And then you want to comply with state statutes as it relates to stockholders, directors, annual reports, payment of annual fees. A lot of these are due in March of the first calendar year, 1st of March each calendar year. So kind of put it in your calendar to keep up with it. And then finally, of course, you have to file your state, federal, and your 1120 tax returns and all your schedules and the various things by the 15th day of the 3rd month following the end of your corporate tax year. So that's very important. Okay, I hope everybody's still awake out there, and I'm trying not to be boring, or as they say in Chicago, for the world champion Chicago Cubs, I hope I don't suck. Trying to keep things, open and alive. So sit up, take a cup of coffee, and let's see if we can't go through this, trying to get you some more information. Okay, we've already talked about some of this, articles of incorporation versus articles of organization. And articles of incorporation are for corporations. A limited liability company files articles of organization, and we're going to go through those two documents in a second. Generally, they're filed with the Secretary of State, generally the corporation division of the particular state. Again, you file in one state, you file as a foreign corporation in another, and any that you operate in, and generally the rule is if you have a physical presence there, and your state taxation guys generally have defined that pretty well along the way. And then, of course, in your state, you have to have a registered agent. A registered agent is a responsible third party who is basically your registered person to receive and designated to receive service of process notices from the courts, from government officials, tax forms, on behalf of the corporation or the LLC. You need to have the agent must be in the state and be prepared to accept documents. So it can't be a P.O. box. It can't be something to that effect where you're trying to, just send out somebody to be there, and it has to be somebody that can be physically served by the courts in the states. A lot of people hire a third-party agency for this because, it really is, when you stop and think about it, you can stop worrying about receiving important documents. Whoever is the service would do that. It's not a very expensive service, $50 a year, $100 a year, something like that. But they accept when the sheriff shows up with the guns and the bulletproof vests and things. Could scare the living bejesus out of you when they show up. I know because they show up in my office about once a week to serve my clients in one form or another. And so it's every time, no matter how many times it's happened, I still get that little lump that you're thinking they're coming for you. So that might be worthwhile for you to get a registered agent. And that's it for now for this tutorial. These tutorials are copyright 2017 BrainTech CSI Inc. All rights reserved.